What sounds like complete nonsense, but has been proven to be true? Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the Vancher channel. Also, please share your thoughts on this video in the comments. Let's get started. Story 1. A full head of healthy human hair has enough tensile strength to lift and support a full-grown elephant. Story 2. Tall people are more likely to get cancer than short people because having more cells increases the chance that any one of them will mutate. They're basically just bigger targets. Story 3. Sometimes when you move your eyes to look at a clock, the second hand appears stuck for a moment because your brain retroactively edits your memory of the time your eyes were moving, so you believe you've been looking at the clock longer than you have. Answer: I think there was a test to prove this. If I remember right, you are shown a bunch of numbers in quick succession, and you have to spot a particular set of numbers. If two of the numbers you need to spot are shown back to back, you'll almost always miss the second number. For example, if you needed to spot the numbers 3, 7, and 8, and the numbers flash 1,000, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, and 10 for the same length of time, you'll see 3 and 7, but will probably miss 8 as your brain freezes for a split second. Story 4. That strongly imagining and envisioning doing an activity in detail actually stimulates the same regions in your brain and actually improves your performance in it as if you're actually doing it for real, or at least similarly. I don't remember exact details. I've tried it with singing specifically, and I definitely feel the same sensations in my throat vocal cords, or at least strong phantom sensations, as when I'm actually doing the actual vocal exercises. I feel the strong imagination with details definitely improves your understanding of the activity itself and therefore ability, because you have to understand so deeply each component, similar to how teaching is the best way to learn. Disclaimer: haven't actually read the article I linked because I learned it from a different source, but I heard that even just imagining lifting weights helps stimulate and strengthen your muscles the way it would as if you were actually exercising. Apparently it's used a lot in sports. It's extremely handy and I love it. Now I wish I just did it more loyal. Answer: this might sound weird, but when I used to compete in Fortnite, I literally played matches in my mind. I would mind fight for hours and hours. After competing during the day, I would go on to fight the same people again in my mind. This has never happened to me so intensely with any other game since, and I advanced so fast, even having only played the game for several months at the time. Story 5. That time literally runs at different speeds depending on where you are. Because of gravity and relativity, a clock on the floor ticks a tiny bit slower than a clock on a shelf, and scientists have actually measured the difference with insanely precise atomic clocks. Story 6. The closest planet to Earth is usually Mercury, because Venus has a longer orbit and spends more time the other side of the sun, while Mercury has far less of an orbit and does it quicker. Story 7. There are more stars in the observable universe than there are grains of sand on all the beaches in the world. Story 8. Dragonflies experience up to 9 Gs. When cornering, they are the most efficient predator, catching up to 95 of the prey they go after. They breath through their anus, and most varieties, not sure if that's the correct word, can't walk. Story 9. One aspect that makes memory unreliable in detail is that you only remember an event one time. After that, each time you recall it, you're only remembering the last time you remembered it, not the event itself. Memory is a game of telephone we play with ourselves. Story 10. We have little crystals in our inner ear. If they get out of place, it can upset your sense of balance. It's sometimes possible to get them back into place by moving your head a certain way. I'm a speech pathologist. I studied audiology and the anatomy of the speech and hearing mechanisms, but that was over 25 years ago, and I never heard about these crystals. Apparently, they were discovered before that time, so I don't know why we were never taught about them. My mom told me the doctor had her move her head to get her crystals back in place, and I thought it was a total hoax until I looked it up. Answer: I discovered the side effects of this by accident after a long stretch of working from home, drinking coffee all morning, and beer in the afternoons and evenings. It started with the weird sensation of Windex on my computer that I sat at all day. But the odor would go away as soon as I got up to sniff around to see if it was coming from the bathroom or something. Happened a few times a week for months. Then one day, late in the evening, my whole desk started to fall on me, or so I thought. After the spinning stopped, I lay on the floor for a second, freaking out. Then I called my neighbor to ask if we had an earthquake or anything they felt, which of course they didn't, because we're in Texas, not California. A couple weeks later, I leaned over for beer 2 or 3 in the bottom back of the fridge, and the whole kitchen started spinning. I grabbed the granite kitchen island, and just repeated to myself, this rock can't be moving. This rock can't be moving, like 10 times. I don't know how many days after that I smelled the Windex again and realized it was me, not my chair or my bathroom. And then finally Googled, why do I smell like ammonia? Turns out if you stay really dehydrated for a long time, your body can't make urea to excrete in urine. So your body gives up on that and leaves it as ammonia released in your sweat glands. Having such high concentrations of this stuff in your blood also causes crystals to form in your feet, gout, and in the ear fluids. When you turn your head, the crystals float around, the bump into the cilia that your brain uses for balance, which is why is felt the falling, spinning sensations occurred if I turned or tilted my head too fast. Took many weeks of wondering before I finally stumbled on the root cause till doctor. Drink lots of water, folks. Story 11. There are more ways to shuffle a standard deck of cards than there are atoms in the solar system. By a lot, it's not even remotely close. Story 12. Idaho is the only state in America to have specifically criminalized cannibalism. There is no federal law against cannibalism, and all 49 other states just use other laws that also apply, like takedown and corpse desecration. Story 13. The Banach-Tarski paradox. It's a mathematical theorem that essentially states, if you have a solid ball, you can break it up into 5 disjoint sets of points, move them and rotate them, and end up with 2 separate solid balls of the same size as the original. In effect, duplicating a ball by cutting it up and rearranging it. I love my weird math facts, but this is one that I have trouble accepting sometimes. Story 14. Most of the cells in your body don't belong to you. We are a superorganism. We evolved a symbiotic relationship with good gut bacteria. You literally need and depend on bacteria inside your body to perform functions your body cannot perform on its own. Story 15. If you take a tiny bit of weakened virus, or just the part of it that says, hey, I'm such and such virus, and put it in your body, it will later protect you and those around you from said virus. Story 16. Psychedelic substances, particularly shrooms, have been shown to be extraordinarily effective at stopping other addictions and treating otherwise substances-resistant depression. It's not because of some bullshit spiritual trip either. It rewires the brain. Answer. I have a story about this. The success rate can vary and many people can attest to it mostly working, but I've lived it, witnessed it happen in real time as an actual spiritual trip, while it does seem to rewire things underneath. When we were self-destructive teenagers, a group of 5 of us took a heavy dose of gold-cap mushrooms, and all of us were prolific boozers, plant substance cigarette smokers up to that point, usually both of the latter when tripping. When the peak hit, we were tripping hard, sitting in this shack in the dark away from the cold outside, and all the other 3 wanted to do was stay there and chain smoke plant substance and cigarettes. Whereas after tripping for a while, me and my best buddy just suddenly wanted to get out of there and be outside breathing fresh air. It took a while before we could extract ourselves, but once we did, we just couldn't stand to touch a cigarette or breathe the secondhand smoke like our lives depended on it. We couldn't verbalize it for a bit until we got our shoot together, but it turns out myself and my buddy were sharing this crazy trip of a deep realization of what we were doing to our bodies. We shared this feeling of the damage the smoke was doing, firsthand or not, and it was just too much. Mix that with some body horror bad tripping we had been going through, missing limb feelings, floating teeth, overfeeling body pains, etc., and we were suddenly and intensely disgusted by cigarettes. I didn't smoke for maybe a couple of weeks afterwards as the afterglow subsided, but living with my parents' sister being smokers, it didn't last too long. Getting away to smoke was also a major escape from a dreary teenage existence. My buddy quit for quite a while after, only slowly dabbling back into it. But after another trip a while later, he really did quit for good. As far as I know, he never smoked again, keeping in close touch with him for about 15 years after. I struggled with it for years on off, but moved to vaping some years back and have been easing off on that too for a while now. But yes, I can attest to psychedelics being able to drive home how unnatural and damaging it is through an almost divine intervention feeling. In lower doses, I've also felt it as just an unclean and unhealthy feeling, which happens when you're most attuned to your body and its place among everything. It doesn't seem to work for everyone, but when it does, it's really kind of a wonder to behold. Story 17. Today I learned about left-handed anger. If you have an angry impulse, act it out with your left hand. Instead, cause you look so weak and stupid doing it, it's automatically funny and you de-escalate yourself. Story 18. Transmutation. It's what scientists do with super colliders, basically, a sub-study of nuclear chemistry. Story 19. In human embryos, the first indentation that forms is the anus. So at one point in time, every person was literally little more than a jerk. Furthermore, that indentation in the embryo soon burrows through to the other side, connecting the anus to the mouth. So with that in mind, whenever you talk, you are talking from your jerk. Story 20. My personal favorite. You'll find more genetic diversity in a room full of 50 chimpanzees than in the entire human species. Story 21. That a woman's skin when wet has a higher coefficient of friction than a man's, and not by a small margin. Story 22. In my area, linguistics, the idea that languages can't be correct or incorrect. We grow up in such policed language environments in school that we normalize this entirely. Correct language is quite literally what people want it to be. Same with incorrect or bad language. Story 23. With our current classification methods, either birds are reptiles or crocodiles are not reptiles, as they share a common ancestor more recently than everything else. We normally consider a reptile. Also, the whole birds are dinosaurs, and dinosaurs were reptiles. Story 24. Humans glow. We glow in infrared light from biochemical reactions. It's just too weak for your eyes. Story 25. There used to be blue people in the U.S. Seems like the sort of thing they should have taught us in history class. Story 26. Buffalo, 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 buffalo is a grammatically correct English sentence. Story 27. In an experiment where ground-breeding bird nests were observed, deer rated more the nests than foxes and wildcats. Story 28. You share 50 of your DNA with bananas, not similar genes. Literally half your genetic code is the same as a banana's. We're all fruit. Existence is a joke. Story 29. The French Secret Service placed a limpet mine on a Greenpeace ship and sunk it to stop it protesting French nuclear testing in the Pacific. They were so incompetent to were caught in days, and the others only just managed to escape via submarine after sinking their yacht. Using trade, the French gov then blackmailed the New Zealand government into releasing the captives. England, NZ's founder, refused to support them, and then the USA turned against NZ because of NZ's no nukes stand. All this drove NZ to have an independent foreign policy, so they no longer automatically follow anybody else's lead. So much for relying your friends and allies in history now repeating with the US, giving the finger to the whole world except former enemies. Story 30. One of the most effective ways at stopping substances use in organized crime is by giving out free substances. Granted, there's some caveats, such as offering rehab along with those substances and doing so in an organized environment rather than just a take-home bag of substances. The same is true for abortions. Answer. That actually makes a ton of sense when you think about it. If you give it away, you control the supply. If the substances become free, you eliminate the illegal market because no one can profit. That makes your free substances the only substances. Your free substances don't contain addictive additives to increase dependency because increasing demand is not the goal. Your free substances aren't being pushed to new users. You can offer rehab, counseling, etc. directly to all substances users because you've become the only source. When you put thought into it, starts to sound stupid that we aren't doing it. Story 31. The old man, the boat. That is a perfectly grammatically correct, incomplete sentence. They're called garden path sentences and are plays on how we typically encounter words and our biases in how we interpret them. If you want a crazy one, the rat, the cat, the dog bit, chased, escaped. That is a perfectly grammatically correct and complete sentence. Story 32. If you were able to fold a piece of paper in half 103 times, it would be thicker than the known universe. Story 33. Humans have stripes. They're called Blaschko lines. They only normally appear visible if you have specific skin condition syndromes. There are theories, though, that some animals can see them visibly even without those presenting conditions, which would be funny if our pets are just thinking we're goofy striped animals. Story 34. The world is run by a cabal of powerful, wealthy pedophile intimacy traffickers. 10 years ago, this was a lunatic take. Story 35. If you blow air into a woman's vag during cunnilingus, you can give her an air embolism and eliminate her accidentally. Story 36. There apparently is a global cabal of intimacy trafficking powerful men. Something I laughed at when it was a basement in a pizza parlor. And what was it? They were harvesting blood, and Hillary was in charge? Not so funny now. Story 37. One of my favorite mathematics puzzles. A group of 100 prisoners are assigned numbers 100 and are led to a room. In the room are 100 boxes, numbered 100, and the prisoners' numbers are randomly distributed in the 100 boxes. For example, box 72 has number 48 in it, and so on. The prisoners are told that if every prisoner can find their number, they can go free. However, each prisoner can only open at most 50 boxes, and once they open all 50, They are led out of the room and can't convey any information to the other prisoners. The prisoners can strategize ahead of time, but can't communicate to one another during each prisoner's search. Given these conditions, what are the maximum odds that the prisoners have of going free? The unintuitive answer: with the right strategy, there is a 1 in 3 chance of them going free. That's wildly unintuitive and absolutely does not seem like it should be possible, but it is the best case scenario. Story 38. Carrots make you see better in the dark. A lie created by the British in World War II so the Germans didn't realize the radar the British pilots had. Later, it was discovered the keratin in carrots actually does help you see at night. Answer: this one actually is largely still a myth. The idea it was later shown to be true is based upon some rather large misinterpretations of conclusions around carotene study and vitamin A deficiency, which can cause reduced vision ability in low-light conditions, especially later in life. Increased carotene intake or medical supplementation can help offset or improve this problem. It doesn't improve whatever the baseline is. It's an issue a lot of older people don't know they have and that it can be helped. More curiously, it's also been found in studies that increased consumption of carrots, but no other food high in beta-carotene appears associated with significantly increased poor night vision among women. Source: carrots, carotene, and seeing in the dark. W. Smith, P. Mitchell, R. Lazarus, 1999. Story 39. The sun accounts for 98% of the mass of the solar system. All the planets in the solar system can fit into the sun 600 times. Story 40. A lot of old sayings and stories are real. Clear day after a storm means another day of storming. Red sky at night, fishers delight. Red sky in morning, sailors take warning. Air pressure, if I recall. And cloves for toothache. Plus, many stories are based on morals phenomena. The wild hunt often punishes those who don't lock their doors or close their windows. The ancient Egyptian calendar had 5 special days said to be the birthday of gods because of how the calendar drifted out of sync over decades. Modern medicine and meteorology are obviously orders of magnitude more accurate, but people without our technology still figured out a lot. They had to, and they did. Also, Arctic just means bear, and Antarctica means opposite of the bear, referring to Ursa Major Minor. Story 41. If you push your tongue to the roof of your mouth and hold it there, you can substantially reduce the pain from sphenopalatine ganglioneuralgia and enjoy ice cream again. Story 42. Monty Hall shows you 3 curtains and asks you to pick one. Behind one is a prize. The other 2 have goats. You pick one. Monty then shows you one of the curtains you didn't pick, with a goat behind it. He then says, do you want to keep the curtain you picked or switch to the remaining unknown curtain? What should you do? Turns out if you switch, your odds of winning are 23. You'll win twice as often. You should always switch. This puzzle fooled mathematics PhDs when it first came out. It seems like all curtains, regardless of what Monty does, should be 13. Or maybe when Monty shows you what's behind one curtain, the 2 unknown curtains should be 50-50 now. 2 curtains, 2 unknowns, but it's not true. Story 43. Both DNA and chromosomes do change over time, especially under certain conditions. Perhaps at some stage, technology may be able to manipulate it directly. It's not as far-fetched and eternal as some believe. Story 44. For women giving birth to twins, the longest recorded time between the first twin being born and the second is 90 days. Story 45. The Banach-Tarski paradox. It's a theorem in mathematics that goes as follows. Given a solid ball in 3-dimensional space, there exists a decomposition of the ball into a finite number of disjoint subsets that can be put back together in a different way to yield 2 identical copies of the original ball. AKA, you can cut up a P and reassemble it into 2 copies of the original P for very weird definitions of cut up. There's a nasty technicality. The paradox requires the axiom of choice, which appears obvious, but actually is known to be impossible to either prove or disprove. Story 46. If someone ever tells you that humans can't detect radio frequency, or FM energy, you can remind them that visible light is in fact RF energy. Story 47. The British, when they ruled India, classified tigers as vermin and sought to extradicate them. When they left, there were less than 10 tigers in India. In 1960, the Indian government passed the Tiger Conservation Act, which brought the tiger population to 4,000. China had tigers too, but they eliminate all of them, causing Chinese tigers to go extinct. Story 48. Banks were undergoing a liquidity crisis in September 2019 and needed an emergency cash injection in the next few months or America would have crashed. Story 49. Most people stop working due to declining health or passing, not financial security or advanced age. Retirement is abnormal. Story 50. Peptic ulcers are caused by bacteria and not stress or diet. Today, it's hard to imagine what a given it was that an aching peptic ulcer was completely assumed to be caused by stress and diet. But a doc in the early 80s, I think, realized it was likely bacteria. In fact, if I remember right, he drank a big old concoction of bacteria-infused liquid, and lo and behold, he got an ulcer. Dude eventually won a Nobel Prize. He also completely decimated the market for Tagamet, the most widely prescribed medicine in the world. The manufacturer has the golden cow, a substance is needed to treat ulcer symptoms forever. Suddenly, now there's a cure and thus no need for the ongoing treatment. Story 51. The mini genus frogs, official scientific names for species of frogs that are part of a genus of extremely small microhylid frogs endemic to Madagascar. Your mini school, minimum Hoover naming them. I will forever be grateful of the joke they made. Story 52. Light behaves differently in the presence of an observer. Even more, it behaves differently even if it's just possible to check if its path is a particle. Otherwise, it acts like a wave. Story 53. The geologic history of Heart Mountain, Wyoming. The rocks in the mountain are almost 300 million years older than the base rocks the mountain rests on. Around 50 million years ago, a sheet of rock 500 square miles in area and 2-3 miles thick detached from a plateau and slid to the southeast and south. Despite the slope of the underlying land being less than 2 degrees, this enormous block of solid rock traveled at least 25 miles to where it is today. The only explanations for how this rock traveled so far on such a low slope basically involve floating it on a cushion of air like a hovercraft. So, either the nearby volcano generated a huge amount of steam or heat from friction caused rock at the bottom to release enormous amounts of carbon dioxide. Story 54. Pedophilia is a completely legal activity all across the globe. If you are in a certain tax bracket, it's very specific but perfectly legal in every single country across the globe. Capitalism is based on having slaves. Real-world execution of this economy type has proven it is unsustainable without a class that receives nothing and dies off as each of its members becomes unable to perform its function. Story 55. Donald Trump is the President of the United States. The President of the United States recently announced that he'd like his birthday this year to include one boy and one girl from each state and territory to compete in a 4-day event called the Patriot Games. Several people think Donald Trump is going to save children from pedophiles. I could go on, but I won't. Story 56. The duck-billed platypus folk thought the first dead specimens brought back were a hoax consisting of several animal parts sewn together because nearly nobody in the West had seen them alive. Also, these types of hoaxes weren't unusual for the time. Story 57. When in the absolute absence of light, your eyes don't see absolute black darkness. Your brain makes up a color due to rod cells in your eyes still being active despite no stimuli. It's called Eigengrau, which is German for intrinsic gray. Also, it's easier to see a light source in the dark by your periphery vision instead of looking straight on, because the center of your vision contains more cone cells, cells that detect color, and your periphery vision contains more rod cells, cells that detect light. Story 58. While he was the head coach at Alabama, Nick Saban had more players drafted in the first round of the NFL draft than the number of games he lost. Story 59. The phrase bucket list, meaning a list of things to do before you die, did not exist before the 2007 movie. There are literally zero examples of it before that, and if you have memories of it being common in the 90s or something, those are false memories. Story 60. The most northern point on the island of Ireland is not in Northern Ireland. It is in the south, the Republic of Ireland. Story 61. If someone invests monthly from age 18 to 30 and stops, they will have more money than someone who invests at age 45 forever because the compounding interest wins over time. Answer: I don't think this is correct. In practice, it depends on how much the 1830 ends up starting with at age 30 and how much the age 45 puts in every year. Not to mention that they'll have different yields. But in theory, since you said forever, I'm pretty sure the 45 can win if they are putting in a certain amount, since they are adding money forever, which will eventually compound harder. Story 62. Really nothing matters much, and there's no purpose to life other than to experience this waking human lifetime. We just give things weight, attention, backed by emotion to make us feel like things matter. Story 63. Honestly, I've never gotten over the answer to asking my parents where babies come from. When you think about it, mammalian reproduction is weird. Story 64. The amount of space around atom nuclei is such that if a hydrogen atom nucleus were the size of a two-story house in Paris, the closest one would be as far as in the middle of Ireland. Story 65. The last American chattel slave owner died in 2000. Her slave, Alfred Irving, was freed by the FBI in 1942. Story 66. Time dilation from going at speed. It sounds like science fiction, but it has had to be accounted for in GPS. Story 67, X-rays, the internet, electricity, germ theory, etc. Without the aid of science, it all seems like witchcraft and magic. Story 68, if you were able to travel faster than the speed of light, you would perceive the world as moving backwards in time. Story 69, here are a few that sound like complete nonsense to most people in December 2025, but are well established to be true and not fringe. The COVID pandemic never ended, just a cultural event from 2020. The SARS-2 virus never was mild, vaccinated or not, and never became less pathogenic over time. More than 1 in 3 Americans have a chronic long-term condition as a result of a COVID infection, aka long COVID. Reinfection dramatically increases the risk of long COVID. There's no cure for long COVID, and it's likely permanent. See the 15-year long-term studies of SARS-1 survivors not good. COVID is spread by aerosols that can linger in indoor spaces and be infectious for hours after an infected person has left. High-quality, well-fitted N95 and better masks are excellent at preventing COVID. At-home rapid tests for COVID, RATs, are terrible at confirming a person does not have COVID. For 90 accuracy, you must have 2 negative tests taken 48 hours apart. PCR testing is best, but there are some decent at-home tests expect to pay $50 to $100 per test. Surely these fun facts sound like nonsense to most people right now, including your doctor who doesn't wear an N95 when they see you. And yet 400,000 peer-reviewed scientific publications over the last 6 years demonstrate long-term cardiometabolic, neurologic, and systemic sequelae following even mild infections. The literature is quite well established and not controversial or fringe. Story 70. The sum of all positive whole numbers is 112. I'd explain how it's at all possible for a bunch of positive numbers to add up to a negative, but I have no idea, and I'm sure the explanation would probably be way over my head. I know it's legit, though. Answer. I followed the math in this video, but don't understand why he subtracted S2 from S in the first place to get that result. The why of it is likely beyond my math rehension, but seems pretty key. Just glancing through readings on it, the implication seems to be that finding a logically sound numeric designation for that infinity to do higher math is more useful than the actual answer of adding infinite integers equals infinity. And I can accept but not really understand that. Story 71. Crystals in your ear can go wonky, make you dizzy and puke, and the fix is to flail around whipping your head in just the right way. Story 72. Human skin is striped, called Blaschko lines, but the difference in color to the rest of the skin is so minimal that the humanese can't tell the difference. Story 73. There are things seen, photographed, and experienced by credible people, either underwater and in our atmosphere, that we have no control over or know what it is. Story 74. If you take a deck of cards and shuffle them well, they will be in an order that no deck of cards has ever been in before. This is because there are 80,658, 475, 170, 943,178, 571, 60, 636,156, 403,766, 975,289, 505, 440, 883, 277, 124,000, 1,000 different arrangements of 52 cards. Story 75. Many blackbirds, like grackles, are actually very brilliantly colored to other birds. That is because they can see in the ultraviolet spectrum, and we can't. Story 76. The jackalope. Not exactly true in the sense that there is distinct species that have deer antlers, but rabbits can grow horns, which is caused by the shop papilloma virus. This likely inspired the myth. Story 77. America re-elected a man who was a convicted criminal, incited an attempted insurrection, stole classified documents and stored them in a bathroom and a closet with a copier with them, used a charity as his personal money, ran a fake university, and dozens of other crimes. Story 78. The Mpemba effect is the observation that hot liquids, or colloids, such as ice cream, can freeze more quickly than colder ones, for similar volumes and surrounding conditions. Physicists remain divided on the effect's reproducibility, precise definition, and underlying mechanisms. Story 79. When you receive a kidney transplant, they usually leave your 2 old kidneys right where they are and just squish a third one into your pelvis. Most people walking around with a transplant actually have 3 kidneys in their body. Story 80. Let's see. 1 EPI, 1, 2, 123, INF 112. 3. The Fourier transform of the Dirac delta function is equal to 1. In other words, if you keep adding up sinusoids of progressively larger frequency, but of the same amplitude, you will get the Dirac delta function. 4. The electric potential around a linearly distributed charge, say a wire through which electricity flows, drops logarithmically as you go away from the wire. It has to do with the counterintuitive fact that the integral of 1x is the linear logarithm. 5. The derivative of the arcus tangens function contains no trigonometric functions. 6. If the array contains equally distributed numbers between 2 already known limits, it is possible to sort it in linear time in the average case. That is called bucket sort. 7. The probability of 2 people among 23 randomly chosen people sharing the same birthday is over 50. That is called birthday paradox. Story 81. The President of the United States of America took private airplane trips to a secret island to tape children. If you told me that at any other point in time, I would have put you in the group of flat earthers. Story 82. Weather manipulation, cloud seeding for sure. One of those that was denied as long as possible, then eventually, well, duh, it's real. Story 83. That more people chose Trump over Harris. And I don't honestly know if it was proven to be true. Pure nonsense. Story 84. The mean density of matter in the universe is about 4 or 5 protons per cubic meter. Sources and specifics vary, but whatever the details are, stuff is spread very thinly. Story 85. You'll be able to count your associates on both hands, but you'll only be able to count your true friends on one hand, and you'll be lucky if you fill that up. Story 86. The Oklahoma state vegetable is the watermelon. If you really squint and use a broad definition, I guess it is a vegetable. On another annoying food note, onions are the only commodity legally banned from being traded on the U.S. futures market. Story 87. You always see your own nose. It is physically in your field of vision, and your brain just edits it out most of the time. Story 88. All people actually have the same number of active X chromosomes. Female second X chromosome gets inactivated in all cells very early in blastocyst development to prevent duplication of X-encoded proteins. The fur color patterning on tortoiseshell cats is the result of this process. Story 89. The sum of all numbers to infinity, 2034, sum up to 112 in a sense using the highly useful Ramanujan summation. This uses an analytic continuation of the Riemann zeta function to make the summation of infinite number convergent, which is a very useful property in some proofs. Story 90. That the government has our best interests in mind and would never do anything to harm its citizens. Story 91. Your brain has a pain map. On that map, genital pain is right next to toe pain. Pain in your lip and pain in your hand take up the largest space on that map. So, one of the best things I learned in PT was learning about how your brain maps out pain and how it sends signals and how it goes through the nerve paths and misses sometimes. For some reason, this helped with pain management better than any medication did. Story 92. Quantum particles can be entangled so that changing one instantly affects another, no matter the distance. Story 93. Being prayed for shows a statistically significant higher risk of complications while in hospital. Story 94. My favorite is that 0.9 repeating is equal to 1. 13, 0.3, repeating 230, 6. Repeating, it must follow that adding the 2 together would create 0.999. Repeating, but we all know 33, 1. Yay math. Story 95. The idea that the continents move and that they once fit together into one large landmass was a completely silly idea that scientists, including my parents, laughed at in the 1940s. The various proofs for the drifting continents theory and Gondwana came many years later. Story 96. Elmer McCurdy did a movie promotion for the 1933 film Narcotic, despite dying in a police shootout in 1911. Story 97. If you walk out into your backyard of birds, bees, grasses, and shrubs, you are outstanding in your field. Story 98. A bullet shot from a gun will hit the floor ground same time as a bullet you drop from your hand if dropped from the same height, i.e., gravity works on both and horizontal movement of the bullet has no effect. Story 99. Special relativity. That the way time flows for an observer is different depending on how fast said observer is going. This can be measured by synchronized atomic clocks, one on the ground and another flown in space. time moves slower for the faster space object. At relatively slow speeds, like the difference between being on the Earth and being in orbit, that difference isn't humanly perceptible, but it is measurable. As you approach light speed, the effect becomes more and more pronounced. Once you reach the speed of light, time effectively stops for you, as perceived by outside observers, but passes normally for everyone else. Though locally, say in your spacecraft, you can't tell the difference. It's why time was all weird in the movie Interstellar. I suspect most people curious enough to be here already knew this, but thought it would be interesting enough for the thread just the same. On a related note, that mass also has an effect on time. The more mass something has, and therefore the more gravitational pull it has, the more it bends space-time like a bowling ball on fabric. The fabric is space-time. Supermassive objects like black holes, massive bowling balls, slow down time. This effect is known as gravitational time dilation. Not only do they slow down time around them, but they also cause light to bend around them in a phenomenon called gravitational lensing. We actually have images of this gravitational lens effects. It's wild. Here's a composite from the Webb Space Telescope earlier this year. And yes, all those smears and dots are other galaxies. Turns out that if you point to a seemingly empty part of the night sky and take a photo of long enough duration, this is what you'll get. See the Hubble Deep Field. Time is a big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff. Or so I've heard. Story 100. Party-based political systems, simply by design, must eventually end in fascism regardless of the party's respective views. A party requires power in order to achieve and maintain efficacy. A party will therefore value power above all else. The fact that some parties at sometimes enact policies that appear good is always coincidental with gaining or maintaining power and is never a party's primary function. A party's primary function is always to gain and to keep power. Story 101. Those who identify as politically conservative have lower IQs than those who identify as liberal or progressive. Story 102. If you fire a neutron at some unstable nuclei, you can release a lot of energy and keep doing this to almost infinity. Story 103. In VFX, the pay is usually fixed, but the changes are infinite. You almost never get extra money for producer-director changes, no matter how big they are. This happens in both corporate projects and freelance work. You just have to eat the cost. Story 104. A balanced diet. I used to complain to my doctor about my low energy and why didn't my vitamins work? Meanwhile, I was eating Campbell's soup, white bread, the odd burger, and 0 veggies. You have to put the proper food into your body so it can function. Story 105. Banks create money. Most people think banks only lend money, but this is not correct. The vast majority of the money in circulation has been literally generated by commercial banks. Story 106. Every time you shuffle a deck of cards, there is a high probability that the cards have never been in that order before. Story 107. Too sensitive. Now the world is starting to understand. They are often more aware, more discerning in reading reality, and more human. Story 108. Advanced craft of unknown origin are operating in our oceans and in our atmosphere. The U.S. government has formally acknowledged that the UAP phenomenon is real. These are physical objects. They may pose a challenge for national security and do pose a challenge for flight safety. If it's one of our adversaries, we're fudge. If it's not one of our adversaries, that opens up a lot of other very interesting questions. UAP clearly pose a safety of flight issue and may pose a challenge to U.S. national security. Safety concerns primarily center on aviators contending with an increasingly cluttered air domain. UAP would also represent a national security challenge if they are foreign adversary collection platforms or provide evidence a potential adversary has developed either a breakthrough or disruptive technology. UAP probably do represent physical objects because they were registered simultaneously across multiple systems, including radar, infrared, electro-optical, and visual observation by pilots. Story 109. When Donald Trump was elected as president the first time around, it was pretty bonkers, haha. I thought it was a joke when he announced that he would be running, but now it just feels normal. Answer: just because something has been normalized doesn't mean it's normal. If a president had done the things that Trump has done publicly 20 years ago, he'd have been despised universally. That's not too long ago, and yet you couldn't make videos of yourself pretending to defecate on your country's population from a jet and have people just laugh at it. It would have been considered third world dictator behavior. Here's not a proven truth, but one I think will be proven with time. Trump isn't the problem. He's a symptom. This mess doesn't go away when Trump leaves office. Story 110. You can't balance a pen pencil on its tip for more than 4 seconds, no matter how hard you try. Interestingly, it's due to the Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. Story 111. Every time someone properly shuffles a card deck, truly random, it is the first time it has been shuffled into that order. There are more ways to shuffle a card deck than there are hydrogen atoms in the sun. Story 112. Let's set up a scenario for this one. Imagine you were to observe a two-dimensional dog on a flat plane. The banamimom, being a thondy creature, would only be able to perceive lines via its perception, but you, being a three-dimensional creature, can see the world around the dog in its entirety all at once. This would include its past at the beginning of the line and its future at the end. This would be the same for a 4D being observing us, where we can see the world around us using our perception. The 4D being would see the world around us as a sort of tube, where our entire lives, past, present, and future, would be visible to it all at once. Within this framework, a form of time travel would be possible. If we could see in 4D space, we could peer into humanity's past and future. Story 113. Did you know that bananas are naturally radioactive? It sounds completely crazy, but it's true because of their high potassium content. They emit a tiny amount of radiation. Story 114. Dark Alliance and the CIA's connection to substances smuggling to support the Contras. I tried explaining it to a friend, and it came out sounding like a bizarre paranoid conspiracy theory, but basically it's actual history. Story 115. Governments actually spend before they tax. The money to pay taxes and buy bonds actually comes first from prior government spending. Story 116. Diesel fuel isn't as flammable as you think. You can drop a lit cigarette in a small cup and it won't light on fire. It will actually put out the cigarette. Story 117. I always found the fact that 90 of the cells in and on your body are not human pretty hard to believe, but apparently true. Story 118. One thing people forget is that the idea of germs sounded like total nonsense for a long time, and it only became obvious once we had the tools to actually see what was there all along. Story 119. Quantum mechanics. I can understand the theories and accept that it works, but to be frank, it just pisses my brain right the fudge off. Story 120. When you breathe in through your nose, one nostril breathes in the air faster than the other. And every few hours, the faster and slower nostrils switch which side is dominant. It's called the nasal cycle and is controlled by the autonomic nervous system. You can prove it to yourself. Breathe in through your nose very slowly while you pay close attention to the sensation. You can feel one nostril taking in the air faster than the other. Try it again every hour, and you will be able to tell that it switched automatically at some point. Probably only works if you are not already congested. Story 121. The lower your house number, the more likely you are to be burgled. This is because most streets have a 1, but not many have a 1,000. Story 122. You will come into contact with more fecal matter on movie theater seats than any other regularly tested surface. Story 123. Sometimes when you have extreme nausea and dizziness, it's because your ear crystals are out of line, and you just need your head waggled back and forth while someone hums at your skull. Story 124. That victims and their families have to do the legwork to solve their own crimes in the majority of cases before the police will take action. Story 125. We can see stars and galaxies that are further away than the light could have traveled in the time the universe exists, about 45.7 billion light years. In Story 126. The smallest species of insect is smaller than the largest species of amoeba. Either is a multicellular organism smaller than a single-celled organism. Well, not counting weird algae like mermaid's wine glass that is technically one cell despite being a several-inch-long plant. Oh, and its offspring are mobile and have eyes. Story 127. We were deceived through every conceivable angle to push emergency authorization a few years back for something. Story 128. 600 discounts are a thing, but only if you know how to use Euler's number, the natural logarithms, and is a complicated way to use big percentage drops within 100 and still never reach 100%. Story 129. A long time ago, I said that the people who make antivirus software are the same people who probably make spread virus software to begin with. It seems to be the exact same skill set, turns out. Story 130. Microscopic bugs live on our eyelids. They eat the dead skin that would dry the area around our eyes if left untouched. The crap we get at the corner of our eyes when we wake up every day contains their droppings. Story 131. I guess this is the opposite, but peanut allergens are not able to be transmitted via the air. Airlines will make announcements asking folks to not eat peanut products if someone with an allergy is on board, but it's been proven that peanut dust or peanut butter vapors cannot cause an allergic reaction. Source: American Academy of Allergy, Asthma, Immunology. Story 132. The reason pizza boxes are not round is that, compared to square ones, they would generate much more waste and therefore be much more expensive. Story 133. The trashy cult of MAGA. Sounds complete bullshit to support an orange cunt that walks, talks, and sounds like a pedo. But holy shoot, they would eat dog shoot just to be in the same room as their Fuhrer. Story 134. The Earth is a sphere revolving around the sun. What is now proved was once only imagined. William Blake. Story 135. We are now as far removed from WW2 as the soldiers who fought in WW2 were from the American Civil War. Story 136. That we still haven't figured out how quantum mechanics and Einstein's theories relate to each other. Both sets of theories make predictions about the real world that seem counterintuitive to what we see in our everyday lives. Yet both sets of theories always work. We use GPS in our everyday lives. Our electronic devices work as they should. No, we can't wrap our everyday simple minds around their predictions, yet we are smart enough to use them. Answer: I fudge dislike quantum mechanics. What the fudge do you mean electrons can teleport? You mean theoretically, right? Like maths and stuff? What the fudge do you mean it's observable? Fudge right off. Fudge off with your probability fields. Get a grip. Be a particle or be a wave. Subatomic particles need to grow the fudge up. I can't be arsed with existential vertigo just because matter doesn't exist unless it feels like it. Story 137. If I remember correctly, the actual claim is that the person who starts early will have more money at retirement. The assumption being that they no longer have an income at age 65 or whatever. But maybe it works out the same either way. You have to remember that for the young investor, their money is still appreciating once they stop contributing. Story 138. The Monty Hall problem. If in a game show you are offered the choice of 3 doors and the prize is behind one of them, you choose one door and the host opens a different door to show that is not a winner. They then ask if you want to stay with your door or switch to the other unopened door. You should always say yes because it turns your odds from 13 to 23 of winning the prize. You would think that it would remain 13 no matter what, but mathematically your odds technically go up. Story 139. I proved to my high school math teacher that 246 around the 1970s. I've forgotten how I did it. The teachings were that you could find one or more examples, then it would not be true. The teacher agreed with my postulate and said just to go on and put it aside. 33, 13, 3, 99, 33, 100, 33, 13, 3, 33, 33, 33, 3, 99, 99, 999 does not equal to 100. Story 140. Technically, all big discovery was nonsense before, but are normal for us. What do you mean that the Earth, taking half of our view every time and being the same size than the sky, move around the sun with some moving dot in the sky? Is there living beings so small we can't see them? And some make us ill? The power of thunder is the same as the one making us move and we can control it. There is light that we can't see. Story 141. A day on Venus is longer than a year on Venus, i.e., a day, the time it takes the planet to make a full rotation, is longer than a year, the time it takes the planet to make a full rotation around the sun, on Venus. Story 142. Statistically, we are genealogically related to each other. That rando you saw on the street of Morocco? Yes, you're related to them. Story 143. Most of the currently circulating viruses are airborne and float in poorly ventilated rooms for hours. Hand sanitizer does not protect you from respiratory viruses. Viruses can seem harmless, but can cause serious health problems down the line, like MS, lupus, diabetes, dementia, and cancer. Story 144. The tiny country of Israel has complete control over the entire government of the most powerful empire in the world, USA. Story 145. Go outside without a coat, kids. You will not get sick from being cold walking in and out of school. Story 146. No matter how many times the Monty Hall problem is explained to me, I'll never understand why switching is the better option. What if I got lucky and picked the car first time? Answer. Have you heard the 10,000 door explanation? It goes like, if you had 10,000 doors to pick from and only one has a prize behind it, what are the chances you'll pick the correct one on the first try? It's really low, right? Now then, suppose we open 9,998 other doors and show them to be empty. You have the door you picked with a really low chance, 1 in 10,000 of being the right door, and a second door. Now, the second door is the door with the prize, a 9,999 in 10,000 chance, unless you chose the correct door the first time. But we already realize that the first door you chose is almost guaranteed to not be correct. So it's really likely, but not impossible, that the second door is the correct one. Now, if all that is the case with 10,000 doors, it is also the case with only 3 doors. The odds aren't quite as favorable, but it's still more likely than not that you chose incorrectly the first time. Choosing the second door in this case is not a guaranteed win. It's just increasing your odds a bit. Story 147. Flying in a certain direction. Say Europe to the US is the closest you will ever get to real-time travel. Spread the distance and it becomes more apparent. Faster travel will make it more apparent too. Returning from Asia 1 year to the Northeast was wild. Story 148. Reality doesn't matter because so many people have different perceptions of reality, and their perception of reality is their reality. Story 149. Mammoths were still alive when the pyramids were built. Proof public school didn't teach me I truly needed to know. Story 150. Spaghettification, the stretching and thinning of an object as it approaches a black hole. Like, yeah, that makes sense, and we do see it, but when a physicist says spaghetti in space, I just feel like I'm getting heckled by some dad. LOL. Story 151. Through history, using common sense hasn't helped at times. Cholera, dysentery, plague must be through bad smells. 4 humors. Heavy items must drop faster than light ones, etc. Story 152. It obviously doesn't sound nonsense now, but at the time, washing your hands between touching cadavers and delivering babies. Story 153. Conservatives will defend pedos to the passing to own the libs. The left are happy for said pedos to be in office to own the libs. Story 154. In a standard card deck of 52 cards, there are more possible combinations of the order of the cards than there are atoms in the universe. Alongside that, any given shuffle of said deck is likely to produce a combination that has never before been duplicated. Story 155. There is actually something that we cannot see, perceive, or detect, but definitely know that it's there. Story 156. Evolution. It's not intuitive to anyone that single-celled organisms diversified to give rise to every life form on this planet, including humans, and yet there it sits, supported by mountains of convergent evidence. Story 157. A felon conman, rapist, pedophile, grifter, racist, idiot, traitor, scumbag is president of the former United States. Again. Story 158. Chemicals in water are making frogs gay. The man who said it tends to go off on wild tangents. Or when he's being interviewed and doesn't have much time, jump right to the most outlandish part of his theories, so people don't really listen to him. Plus, he's very conservative and a Trump supporter, so we all just like to discount everything he says as not being true. It has literally been proven, however, that certain chemicals mimic estrogen, so when they enter the water supply, frogs who are able to sense hormones in the water and change their biological intimacy to even out the ratio of males and females in a certain environment are tricked into believing that it's filled with females. They continue being male and have intimacy with the other male frogs, but no tadpoles are created because there are no eggs. In the end, the chemicals really did make the frogs gay, and science has since proven that those same chemicals can have a detrimental effect on hormone production in humans, especially in children. So this chemical, abbreviated BPA, is now heavily regulated, but Alex Jones took all kinds of heat for pulling it out years ago. Also, those commercials telling you that you can be part of a lawsuit if you were ever exposed to Roundup plant substance killer and suffer any form of cancer at all. Alex Jones predicted that decades ago. This has been known for a long time. Story 159. That is fantastic. Oh, on that front, I haven't been with Comcast for a bunch of years, but when they had to call your router and streaming box, whatever you named it, I swear we did not know that when we chose King Fuck Monster 3, though that was the funniest service phone call ever. Story 160. That's such an interesting topic. I remember learning that honey never spoils, which sounds totally wild, but it's true. What other crazy facts have you come across? Story 161. There are more atoms in a single grain of sand than there are grains of sand in all the beaches in all the world. Story 162. Republicans saying they'd give a shoot about children at gutless POS downvoting without a comment. Loser with nothing to say. You know you can't back that shoot up. Story 163. Lie detector test. It's pretty bad when the guy who invented it spends the rest of his life trying to convince everyone that they aren't reliable. Answer: to expand on this, if the PBS show I watched as a teen was correct, any forensic method that involves a human eye or judgment is significantly flawed. Apparently the cops going, "We need these to match. If these match, we found the killer," leads to bias. The show sent 3 fingerprints that were originally labeled as 99, likely to be the same person, to independent labs with 0 background info, and all 3 came back as no match or inconclusive. Story 164. The myth that we only use 10 of our brains. It's been thoroughly debunked, but I still see it perpetuated in media. Story 165. That the McDonald's hot coffee lawsuit was ridiculous and an example of how sue-happy Americans are. No, McDonald's was repeatedly warned that they were serving their coffee at too hot a temperature, and multiple people had minor incidents and injuries. The coffee that spilled in the lap of the woman who sued was so hot, it fused her labia. She needed significant skin grafts and surgery. She only sued McDonald's for her medical costs, and they fought her claim. She was awarded huge damages because of how awful her injuries were and how long McDonald's dragged the process out. Answer: when I was in college, I minored in public relations, and our professor spent an entire class on this case. I was so horrified because I had made fun of it when it happened. I was young, and I felt really horrified of myself because what that poor woman suffered, she has been the butt of jokes for decades, and she didn't get nearly enough money. It freaking burned off her clitoris. I don't know that there is enough money for that. Story 166. With ticks becoming a more regular concern, a lot of people were led to believe that opossums were tick vacuums. They are not. If you put them in a controlled environment like the study did, they'll eat them. But in the wild, where they can choose what to eat, they don't eat many at all. Certainly not enough to have any measurable reduction in tick numbers. Story 167. That cracking your knuckles gives you arthritis. Meanwhile, knuckle crackers have been living rent-free in their joints for decades with no consequences. Story 168. That MSG causes migraines and is generally harmful. MSG occurs naturally in many foods and is perfectly safe to add to your cooking. Answer: I was pretty sure that this was only said in the 90s to keep people from eating Asian foods. Another way to dislike China for no reason at all other than racism. My mother-in-law was especially hurt by this kind of rhetoric. She used to sell meals out of her apartment. She is from Guam and used MSG a lot. This particular brand of racism resurfaced in the mid-2010s, and she stopped making money from it. She quit altogether after some time. Story 169. IRC, it was recently found that a worrying amount of forensic evidence processing was complete junk. Things like hair analysis and bite mark comparisons are especially dubious. DNA evidence is still considered to be the gold standard, but even that has its issues. Older and less sophisticated DNA tests, for example, compared much smaller genetic sequences, and getting a result back that says a suspect can't be eliminated from the pool of potential contributors is not the same thing as saying he did it. There are probably dozens, if not hundreds of people sitting in jail right now who were convicted with the help of such bad circumstantial evidence. Not all of them are innocent either. But the point is, a lot of forensic evidence is way more sketchy and untrustworthy than TV shows would have you believe. Answer: part of this problem also stems from the FBI claiming scientific evidence in court, which was debunked as bad practice in the best case, and outright lying in the worst ones. Many times people were accused and convicted of crimes for a comparison of hair found on the crime scene to their hair. In retrospect, it was found that these comparisons were null and void, for they either used microscopes with low resolution, so basically could not see enough to make a valid comparison, or outright misidentified hair colors and stated similarity between blonde and black hairs. That was before DNA testing was employed on a grand scale, but nevertheless ended in thousands of convictions. Another high-profile blunder was the Phantom of Heilbronn, a suspected mass murderer searched for years by German police for various deeds, including the eliminate of a member of the police force. Long story short, the Phantom was an unidentified person who worked in the factory producing the sample collectors' Q-tips, which police used to swab crime scenes. Given that these sample collectors were more or less centrally deployed, Germany police used them on numerous crime scenes and fell victim to bad production practices, resulting in the contamination of the swabs. Sample collectors right in the factory. Sources: Story 170. That if you step on a landmine, it won't go off until you move. Those things blow the instant they are touched. Does make for good TV movie drama, though. Story 171. There's this myth that some liquors are uppers and other downers. That's not true. They're all depressant. Answer, but a depressant, most people don't know what that means. All it means is your neurons fire in a depressed state. In the case of adult beverages, though, the neurons in their depressed state fire faster than the base state and stimulated state, so it's not even a useful thing to say at all. Most people think depressants make you feel depressed. That's not an accurate description of what a depressant is. Story 172. Autumn is a good time to start school. Doesn't matter how many times scientists spend grant money doing study after study definitively proving that kids and teenagers especially function best when waking up later. Schools absolutely refuse to bump it back even an hour. It has been proven that grades shoot up if school starts even an hour later. Google it. Story 173. That only overweight people have cellulite. That cellulite is a moral failing. Cellulite is simply the way your adipose tissue is formed. Some people's is smooth and some people's is mesh-like. It's literally like how some people's earlobes are connected to their head and some are unattached. There's zero reason to judge someone for something that's a natural part of their body. Story 174. One that I haven't seen mentioned yet is the notion that you should never change your first answers on a multiple choice test. Many people have come to believe that you're statistically more likely than chance to change your answer from a correct answer to an incorrect one. But apparently, if you return to the question later and think it through again, you're actually far more likely to correct a wrong answer. Answer depends if you are shown whether you are wrong or another option is shown as wrong after your first guess. It's the Monty Hall problem. It doesn't matter if it's 1 in 4 the first, second, or third time, multiple choice guesses will be the same odds each time. It only becomes optimal if someone shows you a wrong answer after the first guess, in which case your odds improve if you switch, which is not likely, so they are wrong. Story 175. Sugar doesn't actually give you a sugar rush. It gives you energy in the sense that it can be broken down easier, faster than protein for the purpose of fueling basic bodily processes. But it absolutely is not going to cause you to run around like you just snorted a fat line of Coke or something. Caffeine doesn't even do that. Story 176. Body types: mesomorph, endomorph, ectomorph. Gross oversimplification at best, but you'll still see people on fitness subreddits swear they can't get in a certain shape because they're X, Y, or Z. Story 177. Vaccines are bad or cause autism. Fudge those who think this. A parent who knowingly allows their kid to get measles or another easily preventable disease instead of having them vaccinated should be charged with child endangerment, unless a doctor tells they shouldn't get vaccinated for legit medical reasons. Story 178. That Trump's first term was the best economy ever when it didn't have a single year of 3 GDP growth and amassed 7-8 trillion debt in just 4 years. Story 179. It takes 21 days to build a habit. This was a misinterpretation of a specific observation about plastic surgery patients getting used to their new faces. It had nothing to do with habit formation. Someone thought it sounded catchy and made money off of it. And here we are, getting shamed because you can't start a habit that you keep for the rest of your life within a month. There have been further studies that it takes about 66 days, but it really depends heavily on what the habit is, how often you do it, and the type of person you are. Story 180. Being out in the rain or cold is not going to give you the cold. The reason people might get it more in the winter or when the weather is bad is because people are indoors and closer with less airflow, so it spreads easier. The amount of people that have argued me about this is insane. Story 181. The Earth isn't flat. We don't just use 10 or whatever of our brains. The parts that are not active are just as important in sending signals as the parts that light up. The wrong spots being active when they aren't needed cause seizures. Global warming is clearly man-made. Trickle-down economics do not, nor have they ever worked anywhere in the world. Bubblegum doesn't stay in your system for 7 years. Vaccines don't cause autism. Being homosexual isn't a choice. We have enough resources for everyone in every capacity to not be homeless or starving. We have an economy that can support living wages and healthcare easily. We don't do it because the people funding campaigns don't want to, because people at the end of their rope have to choose between providing cheap labor that pays enough to barely keep food on the table or just die. They'd rather force people to have to do those jobs than provide incentive to do so. Donald Trump is not innocent of any of the crimes he went to trial for. Jeffrey Epstein didn't eliminate himself, and we don't have a functioning system of checks and balances in this country anymore. Story 182. That granddaddy long legs are the most venomous spider. Their mouths are just too small to bite. 1. They are neither venomous nor poisonous. 2. If they were, their mouths being too small makes no sense. Chiggers, live, etc., are tiny, and they manage to chomp in humans just fine. 3. Well, they are rains. They aren't even spiders. They're fuzzy Q-tips with legs. Story 183. The Roanoke colony mysteriously disappeared. They all went to Croatan Island, now known as Hatteras Island. Story 184. If someone has a concussion, they need sleep to heal. The sooner the better. They are no more likely to slip into a coma than they would be being kept awake. Story 185. You get what you give? Most of the time, you give a lot more than you want in return. I always seem to find myself doing what I can to top up someone else's cup when I only have a few drops left in mine. Sometimes you can give your all, but see nothing in return. I give so much, but never seem to get much back. Story 186. Homeopathy. There is no energy or spirit of belladonna making you feel better. It's just the placebo effect. Story 187. I'd say 99 of the non-FDA regulated supplement industry, e.g. the crap they used to sell at GNC stores. Story 188. The whole your brain isn't finished developing until 25 is a pound of baloney. Your brain is constantly changing, albeit at a slower rate than when you're, say, 17. You are constantly forming new connections and losing others through your entire life. Succinctly put by every teacher's nemesis, Wikipedia, changes in gray matter structure are observed throughout the lifespan with relative consistency. There is no magic switch in your brain that shuts off on your 25th birthday, and I cannot believe a significant portion of this site has still not recognized how asinine that sounds. Story 189. Pulling out works for contraception. Have a family friend who is a school nurse tell us she still hears it at the school she works at. Story 190. The myth is that poison ivy spreads by scratching, by rash contact, and by contact with the serous drainage from the rash. The truth is that once the rash and all items that have contacted the urushiol have been properly cleaned, the rash will not spread. The problem is that this urushiol oil is so sticky that it gets everywhere before you know you've contacted it. So by the time the rash pops up, it's all over your home and your pet and your car, and you keep recontacting it, giving the illusion that it's spreading. Story 191. If you were to lay the blood vessels in the human body end to end, they would stretch around the world multiple times, basically 100. In actuality, this fact was based on an inaccurate estimate from a book from 1922 that rose to prominence in popular knowledge due to being referred to, usually not directly, many other works, including David Suzuki, famous Canadian educator. More accurate and recent estimates puts the length around 19,000, which, if at the high end of this estimate, wouldn't even reach halfway around the globe. Kurzgesagt made a really cool YouTube video about it. That's it for this video. Don't forget to support Vancher and my second channel, Vanchus. See you soon.